And they played the Cavaliers earlier in the weekend, fresh off of All-Star break. And they got blown out by Cleveland.
Smoked, baby.
And
Go Cavs.
And then they lost yesterday to Boston, who completely has their number. New York Knicks are now 0-7 against the Cavaliers, the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the Boston Celtics. And the Knicks, with this type of stretch that they have had, do not satisfy the famous 40-20 rule that Phil Jackson coined back in the old days, where NBA champions, if you really want to be in the thick of competing, you got to be at least 40 wins, 20 losses by the time you get to 60 games into the season. The Knicks are now 37-20, and the only teams that did satisfy that requirement are Cleveland, Boston, and the OKC Thunder. The reason I say this is because since the 1983-84 season, when the NBA expanded to the new format, 90% of NBA champions have satisfied this rule. So it's by no means a given, but other than a couple exceptions, the 95 Rockets, the 04 Pistons, the 06 Heat, teams that made midseason trades that really changed the trajectory of that team. Other than a couple of the 21 Bucks were another team that didn't satisfy it but won. Other than a couple, you got to satisfy that rule. The Knicks don't do that, and I have a couple problems with the Knicks. Number one, they can't beat a good team. Number two, defensively they stink. And
on a Tibbs basketball team.
And I can't deal with Tibbs. If you are sitting there as a Knicks fan thinking that Tom Thibodeau can take you to the promised land, you got another thing coming. Tibbs is the J.B. Bickerstaff type of role. He is the floor raiser head coach. He is not a ceiling buster head coach. Tibbs and his unwillingness, his stubbornness to go to the bench, to get more guys involved, to not play 7 guys 44 minutes a night and just go and survive off of that. When these guys inevitably get hurt, and Karl-Anthony Towns, I bring this up because Karl-Anthony Towns got banged up at a point in the fourth quarter yesterday, went to the bench, hobbling, knee injury, laying down across the bench. He's back in, down 18 with 4 minutes to go, and Tom Thibodeau says post-game, well, he said he was fine. He said he was fine. Tom, the game is over. The game is over. Famously, you kept Derrick Rose in the game game 1 against the Sixers up 12 with 2 minutes to go, and he tore his ACL. This is just I don't agree with his philosophy around these playing players.
And I'm happy you brought up the bench thing because that's what the Knicks lack. You look at Cleveland, you look at Boston, these are deep teams. Outside of their starting 5, and I'm not necessarily a big OG Anunoby fan, Colin, they don't have anybody off that bench of substance. They're 5 players deep. And when those guys get exhausted and you go to the bench.
They use McBride, and then they go and they use
Landry Shamet, Cameron Payne. Colin, these aren't, compared to the guys on Cleveland's bench and Boston's bench, this isn't a basketball team that's set up to go deep into the NBA playoffs. And I know sometimes the Thibodeau's style of hard-nosed defense can throw a wrench into some of the plans. Like, if you remember, the Knicks lost to the Cavs, what was it, 2 years ago? I didn't expect the Knicks to win that series, but I think this Cleveland team is deeper. I don't think Boston obviously has any problems with them. It's a 2-team race in the Eastern Conference. I'm tired. I say so. I'm tired of hearing about the Knicks. I'm tired of hearing about anybody in that conference that's not Boston and Cleveland.
Well, they didn't
no one in that conference has proved that, at least in the regular season, and I know the regular season doesn't necessarily mean squat, but you got to win these games and be able to position yourself for good matchups in the playoffs. Colin, outside of those top 2 teams in Boston and Cleveland, nobody in the Eastern Conference, in my opinion, has a chance of getting
hold on.
to the
But the Knicks are 0-7 now against those 3 teams.
They're not deep.
So being 0-7 against those big-time teams, all right, if you can't defend at a high level, if you can't score amongst the great teams, and you're going to be dealing with injuries by the time the season concludes, off of that alone, I think there's a lot of trouble to be had with this Knicks team. I'm thinking about ceiling here, and to Mike's point, he's probably right. I don't know if that's a construction problem, but I think it's a Thibodeau problem. I think this is a Tom Thibodeau. I guess this is the Achilles heel of how he runs his teams. He runs these players into the ground. I'm not saying it's going to come up. I'm not saying it comes up every year. The Brunson wrist injury was fluky, and the hamstring with Anunoby, the whole thing. But these guys, every year, a Tom Thibodeau team hobbles to the finish line. And they could barely survive in the postseason. Now, it makes it seem like I'm advocating for load management. I am not, but there's a level to this. Thibodeau plays 7 guys 44 minutes a game.
Yep. Hart
never leaves the game. He's an Iron Man. Good for him. Mikal Bridges is an Iron Man as well. Good for him. But there's other players where you kind of need to compartmentalize where you allocate these minutes.
Correct.
And you saw a glimpse of it yesterday with Anthony Towns. And he came back into the game with 4 minutes to go, and
Why?
he was not healthy.
Yeah, why?
He did not look healthy. He did not look 100%. He played well, but it did not look 100%. It's just, I'm trying to think of it before it becomes a problem, because it's going to become a problem again. The Knicks, whether a contender, pretender, whatever you want to call it, I would, as his favor on the side of Mike. I mean, upside, yeah, their front five is very, very good, very, very well balanced, the whole thing. But it's the Tom Thibodeau team that drives me absolutely nuts. And I cannot trust him as a postseason coach. He is the floor raiser. He'll get the team. He did it in Minnesota. He did it with Chicago. And he did it with the Knicks. They all moved on. They all moved on. When he was doing adequate,
Right.
they still moved on. Because that's what you do with Tom Thibodeau. He gets the team to a spot where another coach can propel them.
Yep, and we've seen him, to your point, we've seen him do it with the Bulls. We've seen him do it with the Timberwolves. The thing that stuck out to me that you said is the injury stuff. I mean, the Derrick Rose thing was an absolute joke back in, we got to as far back as 2011. So this has been something that Tibbs has kind of been doing his entire career. I'll end with this, and I'll say I'm tired of hearing about the Knicks. I'm tired of obviously, we're talking about them because they're New York. It's the Knicks. It's the allure of Madison Square Garden. I'm tired of hearing about them. They're not a contender. They're not a contender, and they're not going to win anything this year. They got to get deeper. I think Tibbs has to step back a little bit, and maybe they got to get rid of Tibbs, Colin. What do you want your team to be? Do you want your team to be a title contender? If so, might have to move on from Tom Thibodeau.
0-7 against the top of the league, and basically excellent against the rest of the league, being like 37-10. That to me doesn't whistle to me as a playoff caliber top of the line team. Fun fact about Tom Tibbs: if you're so high on Tom Tibbs in terms of the coaches with high enough sample size, and there's not enough coaches in the NBA with a high enough sample size, but of those with a high enough playoff and regular season sample size, in terms of regular season win percentage to playoff win percentage, the difference is I have him right here. Popovich is only 2% of a downward trajectory. He has a 62 regular season, 59% in the postseason. You go to Kerr. Kerr has got a positive percentage from the playoffs on. Doc Rivers, it's 7% downward. And then some other ones really quickly here. Mike Malone, 0.004 downward, basically neck and neck with Detroit. Mike Brown, Ty Lue, basically at a 0, basically the same either way. Spoelstra, 0.5% down from regular season to postseason win percentage. Tom Thibodeau, 13%.
Colin, floor raiser, not a championship
13%,
winner.
57% winning percentage in the regular season, and 44 win percentage in the playoffs.
He'll change the culture for you. His teams play hard. He can't get it done.
Not high in the Knicks. Not high in what I'm seeing from the Knicks. They're going to have that Boston in the second round, and Boston has their number. I have a hard time seeing the Knicks changing culture here, even if they're healthy enough at the end of the regular season into the postseason. That's Mike Rizzo, Colin Russo, Russo and Rizzo on ESPN 106.3. We'll take a time out, do a little 5 and 5.